Imagine a scenario where tiny and insignificant Bulgaria could change the course of the world. Had Bulgaria joined the Entente instead of the Central Powers, perhaps the Russian Civil War is prevented due to an early Entente victory, which would also mean no communism in Europe. But also, the United States of America may never get involved in the Great War. So this means no self-determination ideas, making the Europeans take what they desire. Let me show you what would change had Bulgaria joined the Entente in the Great War, and how this would impact the entire continent. When the Great War started, Bulgaria declared neutrality, but they were approached both by the Central Powers and the Entente with offers regarding Bulgaria joining their side. The Entente promised Bulgaria parts of Macedonia, which they would force Serbia to cede, in exchange for Bulgaria joining their side. On the other hand, the Central Powers promised Bulgaria everything that they would ever want, which is all of Macedonia, Niš province from Serbia, and all of Dobruja from Romania. This is the biggest reason why Bulgaria historically joined the Central Powers. The Bulgarians were also led by Ferdinand I, who was an Austrian nobleman, but this played little influence in Bulgaria joining the Central Powers. Having this in mind, one way to make Bulgaria join the Entente is for the Entente to make a better offer to Bulgaria, which is slightly less territory than the Central Powers, but is also less risky. The problem with this is Serbia, who would have to give up all of Macedonia and parts of southeastern Serbia. You may say that Serbia got to form Yugoslavia historically, so them giving up on these lands in red in order to get the lands in green is a net positive, which is true. The problem is that before 1918, the Entente didn't expect Austria-Hungary to completely disintegrate and collapse from within. So, before 1918, in case of an Entente victory, the Entente expected to give Serbia only Bosnia and Herzegovina, at the expense of Macedonia for Bulgaria, which is not really a great trade for Serbia. Roughly, Serbia would trade Macedonia for Bosnia, which would have the same population and development, so despite Serbia winning the war, they wouldn't gain too much land and influence. Serbia has historically claimed that to them Macedonia is more important than Bosnia and Herzegovina, so this current deal literally has 0% chance of succeeding. This is why I think that the Entente would find it difficult to negotiate with Serbia, as they would need to somehow predict the terrible collapse of Austria-Hungary and promise Serbia all of the Western Balkans. In any case, just for the sake of this alternate history, I would have the Entente promise Serbia to form Yugoslavia, only in exchange for Macedonia going to Bulgaria. I want to quickly remind you that this is perhaps unrealistic, as the Entente couldn't keep up these promises at the time, but let me tell you what happened in the Treaty of London in 1915, where Italy was promised land, but they didn't get all of it, so the Entente can simply lie, right? So this is how the Entente would get Bulgaria on their side, but there would be a catch. Considering the size of the Serbian kingdom and the fact that they are at war, they will not be willing to give up on all of Macedonia just yet, as this would reduce their size significantly. This is why Bulgaria would be only allowed to annex Macedonia after the war, to which Serbia would agree, as they would expand in the Western Balkans. This small change has the potential to change the course of the entire world, as Bulgaria, which has been described as the most committed ally of Germany in the Great War, would be on the opposite side of this conflict. This is a great boost for the Entente and a big blow for the Central Powers. Historically, Serbia had no problem holding against Austria-Hungary on their own, and they only collapsed when Bulgaria joined the opposite side and quickly overran Serbia. This time it will not happen, so Serbia would hold against Austria-Hungary effectively, greatly damaging the Austrian morale. Considering the Entente offer for Bulgaria, I think it's very possible for the Bulgarians to enter the war a lot sooner, perhaps in early 1915, rather than late 1915, which is an important detail for later in the video. With Bulgaria and the Entente, the Ottoman Empire would be slightly more cautious when picking a side. Except that this wouldn't happen, and some Ottoman admirals would bomb Sevastopol regardless of the situation, and make the Ottoman Empire join the Central Powers. Jokes aside, I think that the Ottoman entry into the side of the Central Powers would be slightly less of an issue, as they can see this as a way for them to regain their lost lands in the First Balkan War, mainly at the expense of Bulgaria. Thus the Ottoman Empire would still join the Central Powers, a decision I think would be made easier with Bulgaria joining the opposite side. Obviously, there is the alternative of the Ottoman Empire just staying neutral, as the Entente would be in a way stronger position, but then everything would be drastically different in the Great War, so too difficult to predict. For the sake of this video, I would have the Ottoman Empire join the Central Powers, like they did historically, as the other alternative deserves its own video. The scenario I just picked is actually 10 times more interesting, as with Bulgaria on the side of the Entente, the Gallipoli campaign may be a huge success. The goal of Britain was to get Constantinople, just so they can aid Russia via the Bosphorus Strait, but also hopefully to capitulate the Ottoman Empire. Historically, the Gallipoli campaign was a failure, and it had to be carried out via naval invasion, straight into well-fortified Ottoman positions. This time, with Bulgaria on the side of the Entente, they would have the opportunity to expand into eastern Thrace after the war, taking modern-day Edirne, Luleburgas and Lozengrad. Still, before that, the Bulgarians need to win the Great War. I want to tell you about the First Balkan War in 1912-1913, where Bulgaria almost captured Constantinople, but they failed in the first and second Catalja offensives and never fully took the city. The Bulgarians failed mostly because of a lack of supply and because they waited for too long, giving the enemy time to dig in and establish defensible positions. The Catalja line was the last hope for the Ottoman Empire to keep Constantinople in the First Balkan War, but in this alternate scenario, the Bulgarians learned their lesson, so the capture of Constantinople by the Bulgarian army is not too insane to consider. Bundle this with the fact that while Bulgaria is assaulting the Ottomans on the front lines, that Britain would then launch the Gallipoli campaign, in coordination with the Bulgarian advances. To me, this would for sure result in Constantinople to fall easily to the Entente, which would make supplying Russia with vital resources easier. This is the key for the Bolshevik revolution perhaps not happening, as the war would obviously be shorter due to the Central Powers losing quickly, but also because Russia can be supplied via the Bosphorus Strait, so there is no famine and insanely big bread prices. As for the rest of the fronts, I would assume that they would look pretty identical, but I would speed up key events by a couple of months. This means that trench warfare would happen sooner on the Western Front, and similar battles to the one of the Somme and Verdun would happen a lot sooner. This is important as the Brusilov offensive would be more successful in taking parts of Galicia, encouraging Romania to join the Entente maybe sooner than they did historically. When Romania joined the Entente in our timeline, they quickly capitulated and were occupied, but this time this wouldn't be the case, as Bulgaria and Serbia would be still standing, but also Russia. This is why I think that Romania can join the Entente a lot sooner than they did historically, especially if the Entente captures Constantinople in mid-1915. This would again tip the scale in favor of the Entente, but we're not done. Italy is likely to join the Entente at around the same time as they did historically, so just in 1915 the Entente would have gained Bulgaria, Romania and Italy as allies, while the Central Powers only got the Ottoman Empire, who just lost Constantinople. With that pace, the Central Powers would be defeated before the United States of America joins the war on the side of the Entente, so the peace treaty would be really different, considering the lack of self-determination ideas, introduced mostly by Woodrow Wilson. Considering the front lines, I would say that Germany would be way more aggressive on the Western Front, trying to capture Paris at all costs, and then focus on defeating Russia. This is why I can see the Entente being pushed back on the Western Front, but on all fronts the Entente would perform very well. I would say that Austria-Hungary would be in an especially vulnerable position. Let me explain why. First up, Serbia never capitulated and are holding their own, but also with Bulgaria and the Entente, it looks like Serbia will never capitulate in this war. The second problem for Austria-Hungary is Romania, which is advancing in Transylvania at record speeds, but also Russia, who is taking Galicia. The Italians on the other hand are sitting mostly in the mountains, but are occupying significant part of the Austrian army. This means that Austria-Hungary is fighting a three-front war, which to put it mildly, really sucks. The goal of Russia with the Brusilov offensive was to take Galicia, cross the Carpathian Mountains, then enter the Pannonian Basin and capture Budapest, forcing Hungary to either rebel or to surrender. While this was a failure as the Russians historically only got to Galicia, this time it's a lot different, with Serbia still occupying Austrian forces, and Romania actively taking Transylvania. So I think it's reasonable to say that Russia would be able to cross the Carpathian Mountains and threaten Hungary. At that point I would expect Hungary to rebel nationwide, as they are looking to be on the losing side of the war. The Hungarian portion of Austria-Hungary joined only because of Austria, who wanted to punish and puppet Serbia. Now the situation is that Hungary is looking likely to lose Slovakia to Russia, Transylvania to Romania, but also their South Slavic lands to Serbia. This would be a national catastrophe for the Hungarians, so they would try to rebel and switch sides. The timing of this would be very convenient, as Franz Joseph would still die in 1916, So when this is officially announced, Hungary would break their personal union with Austria and try to enter the Entente, only so they can minimize their losses. You may say that this is unrealistic, but I really doubt that Hungary would fight up until the bitter end, just so they can help Austria. The fact is that the Entente is way more competent in this timeline, so the Hungarians would have to act differently from what happened historically. Going down south, the Greeks were historically split between joining the Central Powers, which was favored by the Greek king, and joining the Entente, which was favored by the Prime Minister. Greece historically temporarily split in two up until they joined the Entente in 1917, but this time I would say that this would be a lot more different. Greece joining the Central Powers under these conditions would be a stretch. Firstly, because they would have to ally with the Ottoman Empire, which we all know wouldn't happen. But secondly, even if the Central Powers were to win, Greece would only get Bulgarian Thrace and Cyprus, and the latter may be even going to the Ottoman Empire, so it's not guaranteed. This means that in this alternate timeline, the split would not be between joining either side, but something else. The king would favor neutrality, while the Prime Minister would favor the Entente. Considering how the Entente is crushing the Central Powers, in addition to the Entente controlling Constantinople, I'd say that Greece is more swayed to join the Entente a lot sooner, as they would be promised some Anatolian lands. Zooming out to the European continent yet again, by the year of 1916 I predict that Europe would look like this if Bulgaria joined the Entente, which while it seems like something minor or absurd, allows for the capture of Constantinople, and a lot more successful Brusilov offensive. But also for Romania, Greece and Italy to join the Entente months or years earlier, which is a net positive for the Entente. Months after that, the Hungarians would aid the Entente in taking out most of Austria, which would make Germany want to annex the Austrian portion and force Austria to continue the war on their side. As for the Ottoman Empire, they would lose hope and prefer to get a milder peace treaty. Let me remind you that just like Greece was historically, the Ottomans were split on which side to join, or whether they should join at all, but due to the reckless actions of a few individuals, the Ottomans joined the Central Powers, which was not too popular. This, bundled with the capture of Constantinople, might mean that there would be a milder peace treaty for the Ottoman Empire. This would leave Germany practically alone against the entire world, and the United States of America are looking increasingly more likely to join the Entente, so the situation is dire for Germany. Historically, the Germans had a chance to win the war after Russia capitulated and the peace treaty of Brest-Litovsk was signed, but now Russia is far away from capitulating, and the same is for France. Considering this, I think it's possible for Germany to also drop out of the war early, perhaps in late 1916 or early 1917, hoping for a milder peace treaty and to try again in the next war. With that, the Great War would come to an end, with an Entente victory, but most importantly, Russia would never capitulate, and the United States of America never joined the war and introduced their ideas of self-determination. Let me show you how the peace treaty would look like, as in the Balkans, Bulgaria would get their promised lands from Serbia, but also parts of Western Thrace, formerly part of the Ottoman Empire. Serbia would expand into the Western Balkans and form Yugoslavia, just like how they did historically, but Italy is likely to keep their promised lands in Dalmatia in the Treaty of London in 1915, which is possible due to the lack of self-determination ideas introduced by Woodrow Wilson. Greece would get the Aegean coast, including the city of Smyrna, but the Entente would have different plans for Constantinople. Historically, the Entente wanted to make Constantinople into an international zone, controlled by the League of Nations, so this plan may actually happen. As for the rest of the Ottoman Empire, Russia would take out Ottoman Armenia, with France and Britain partitioning the Middle East just like how they did in our timeline. But I imagine they would be less harsh on the Ottomans and allow them to keep most of northern Syria and Iraq. Moving back to the Balkans, Romania would get most of Transylvania, except the northern part, which would go to Hungary. This is done for two reasons. One, because Bulgaria would not accept a bigger Romania without compensation. And second, because Hungary helped the Entente, so they wouldn't be punished too hardly. This is why Hungary may keep Vojvodina at the expense of Yugoslavia. Russia would take all of Galicia and form a Polish kingdom, as they want to reduce their rebellious population. As for the rest of Austria, I have no idea what would happen to them. I want to do something very interesting and original, but remember that this is not realistic. I will make it into Austria-Bohemia, where the Habsburgs led by Charles I would continue their rule. This is because the Entente doesn't want a weak and separate Austrian and Bohemian state that Germany can later annex, just like how they did in this alternate Great War. Hungary would also not let go of Slovakia, as this would be part of the deal between them and the Entente, and they would also get to keep Burgenland. As to address the elephant in the room, which is Germany. Colonially, everything would happen in exactly the same way, so the true changes would be in Europe. The peace treaty would look similar to what we had historically, as France would take Alsace-Lorraine and establish a protectorate in the Saarland, with Belgium getting Eupen and Malmedy. The difference is that I doubt Denmark would get any free land out of this, as the war was almost 2 years shorter, so Germany wouldn't be punished too badly. In the east, I can see Russia taking Katowice and the Wielopolska region, which translates to Greater Poland, and is the birthplace of the Polish nation. These lands would be given to the Polish kingdom, which gesture should appease the Poles and prevent them from trying to leave Russia in the near future, which would only stabilize the Russians. Zooming out, this is how Europe would look like in this scenario, but the video is not yet over. This is because I think that Turkey may have a war of independence, similar to our own, where Mustafa Kemal Atatürk managed to reverse most of the harm of the Treaty of Sèvres, replacing it with the Treaty of Lausanne. A similar attempt may be made in this scenario, despite the Ottoman Empire still surviving, but being greatly reduced in size. If Mustafa Kemal initiates the Turkish War of Independence, I think that he would be defeated. The first reason for this is because Greece would be in a way stronger position, but also Bulgaria may help the Greeks, as they don't want a strong Ottoman state. The second reason is France and Britain, who would protect the international Bosphorus zone, including Constantinople, so the Turks would have to fight more enemies. This time, France and Britain are not so exhausted by the Great War, so they can spare forces to defeat Mustafa Kemal. The final reason why I think that this alternate Turkish War of Independence would fail is because of the lack of the Soviet Union. Historically, the Soviets helped Turkey a lot in this war, as they sent a lot of equipment and even money to the Turkish cause. This was done because the Soviets wanted to punish the Entente, and sent a message for them to stop supporting White Russia during the Russian Civil War. This time, there is no Soviet Union, and Russia would be even more hostile towards Turkey, so there is no way for Mustafa Kemal to win against all of these enemies. So I'm sorry for all of my Turkish subscribers. Zooming out, this would change quite a lot, as Russia would never go communist, at least not initially. The Russians would still be very unstable, but if a constitutional monarchy is established, the country may be saved from a collapse. As you can clearly see, the Russian beast is quite scary, so France and Britain may befriend Germany, as they want the Germans on their side. Britain and Russia have always had a rivalry, while France only allied with Russia after the formation of Germany, which was threatening both France and Russia. Long story short, France and Britain would ditch their alliance with the Russians and ally with Germany instead, which would be still a monarchy under Wilhelm III, who knew English very well, so an alliance between these countries is possible. Even if Germany were to somehow turn ultranationalist, they would be in a tough position. This is because the famous Anschluss may never take place, as the Allies cannot let Austria-Bohemia be annexed by Germany. Additionally, Italy got what they were promised in the Treaty of London in 1915, but they still may turn ultranationalist. Regardless of that, the Italians would still defend Austria-Bohemia's independence and existence. So, if Germany were to turn ultranationalist, they have no option but to take a chill pill and relax. All of this happened because Bulgaria joined the Entente in the Great War, which snowballed into an early Entente victory, and several events went in favor for the Entente. We cannot really explore the Second World War in this scenario, as so many variables have changed. What we know is that something has to change in Russia. I would say that the communist revolution wouldn't happen right away, as Russia was victorious in the Great War too quickly. My opinion is that the communists won the civil war just because Russia was at war and were losing hard, so getting rid of both of these events would also decrease the chance of an October revolution. Additionally, Nicholas II had a personal union with Finland, so if the Romanov family were to be ousted, Finland would leave Russia, so getting rid of the Romanovs would be an unpopular decision. Earlier I mentioned that Russia would become a constitutional monarchy, with a functioning and democratic parliament. To me, this is what would happen right after the Great War, but Russia has to liberalize or collapse, as they hold too many minorities. The fact is that the Russians gave partial autonomy to Poland, so many other minorities would request the same, which would most likely be granted by the Russian parliament. The reason for that is if these countries were to somehow break away, most likely France, Britain and Germany would befriend them and form an alliance with them, humiliating Russia in the process. To me, this scenario looks like an European Cold War between the Western Entente and Russia, and maybe Serbia and Bulgaria. Hungary can join either side, but for the time being, they would remain neutral, just like Austria-Bohemia. The Second World War will most likely not be initiated by the Germans, as the Western Entente will not let Germany fall to ultranationalism, but also because the Germans got a slightly better peace treaty. Still, as I mentioned earlier, even if Germany were to become ultranationalist, there is no way they would annex Austria-Bohemia, so the appeasement strategy will not work indefinitely, maybe resulting in an earlier German defeat, and then the Germans would join the Western Entente. Either way is possible. As for Bulgaria, the star of the video, they mostly got what they wanted, which is most of Macedonia, and in the process changed the world history quite a lot. Is this realistic? Probably not, but was it interesting? Yeah, I think so. I suggest you take a look at this video, where Bulgaria wins the Second Balkan War and gains most of Macedonia. Click it if you're curious as to see how it's possible, but also what would happen next in the Great War. Thank you for watching and I wish you the best day possible.